members of the 113th Cybertronian Senate, honorable descendants of the progenitors and the custodians of the sacred primal lineage, I want a word with you. This is World. He broke the law. Associates of yours wanted me to overlook that fact. I didn't, and 2 good officers died as a result. I want you to look at him and realize that even the smallest actions have consequences. You sit in session detached from the real world, giving orders designed to keep the rest of us in check, and if anyone steps out of line, if anyone thinks a rogue thought, you tighten the screws. And I didn't even realize this until I met a miner from Tarm, a friend who had so much to say that he couldn't find the words. A miner by design, but not by choice. He wanted the freedom to choose his own fate, not have it decided for him by a ruling elite who presume to know best. And only now do I recognize the limits that you put on our freedom, and you do it because you are terrified of anything you can't control. My friend's name was Megatron, and he had 3 questions. 3 things he said you should demand to know of any powerful institution. Question 1, in whose interest do you exercise your power? Question 2, to whom are you accountable? And 3, how can we get rid of you?
This is my favorite Transformers figure ever. First things first, we gotta talk about the colors, both in terms of plastic as well as the minor paint applications. He looks absolutely gorgeous and it perfectly replicates the colors of the artwork. The proportions and detail of this figure are perfect. He's incredibly accurate to the source material with the back tires and the arm cannons, which is really amazing, especially given that this is a remold of Gamer Edition Optimus. I actually really like Gamer Edition Prime, I think he's a great figure, but this version does everything so much better. In terms of articulation, there's really nothing missing here. He's got everything you would want from a modern Transformer. The ankle tilts on this guy specifically are really good. You have a lot of variety in terms of posability here. The sculpting as well as the posability really goes a long way to making this figure feel dynamic and heroic in a way that very few figures are, even among Optimus Prime ones. My favorite part about IDW's comics is that a lot of the artists reinvented the characters in very unique and interesting ways, combining a lot of influences from other media. However, they still felt faithful to the characters, which is very different from the later years of IDW, where they pretty much stuck with the toy designs for a lot of these characters. This Optimus almost acts as the perfect middle ground between the more traditional design of Siege compared to the more radical and out there design of a lot of legacy releases like Animated Optimus. He still evokes the image that we associate with Optimus Prime, but he's much more dynamic and stylized than just your standard Earthrise or Siege release. Now, it may seem weird and a little unfair to compare an Orion Pax figure to Optimus Prime figures, however, Optimus' design once he becomes a Prime doesn't really change that much from this in the comic books. In fact, his design featured in early storylines like Stormbringer is actually very similar to this version. And given that we saw the Stormbringer design of Bludgeon appear in a recent Doom and Destruction 2-pack, I wonder if we'll see an updated version of this Optimus mold with the added details that he had in the comics. Speaking of Optimus, despite being Orion Pax, he does feature a Matrix chamber that also includes a Matrix. This Matrix is the only thing about this figure that I'm not super jazzed about. It's very faithful to the version featured in the War for Cybertron video game. However, this is IDW Optimus, and while the IDW comics were very influential to the Align continuity, this isn't a perfect reflection of what the Matrix is in that series. Now, you can put a War for Cybertron trilogy Matrix in there, however, it's a little too big, so the chamber will not close. And in case anyone was curious, it does not fit into the Matrix chamber of Studio Series 86 Optimus or any of the Earthrise or Kingdom versions of this character. However, you can give it to Bumblebee if you're into that sort of thing. But since both are placed in a 5mm peg, you can use other accessories for this Matrix with this new Matrix. Outside of the Matrix chamber, the only other play feature he has is a carryover from the War for Cybertron game Optimus, and that's that his arm can detach. And no, this isn't so he can go on the offensive, that's the Skybound comics, that's a totally different thing. Also, the peg on my Megatron's arm would not fit in there, I've tried. This is cool, but unless you're looking to recreate some Dark of the Moon style battle damage by having some limbs missing, it really doesn't serve much of a purpose since his gun can't attach like the Gamer Edition version can. Those of you familiar with the upgrade kit scene might have remembered when DNA Designs made an attachment that Gamer Edition Optimus could hold his arm cannon like a regular gun. We actually see Hasbro's own version of that with this figure. While it's not the perfect representation of his weapon from the comics, it does do a good job, especially if you're looking to recreate the iconic Nobody Move panel. On the subject of comparisons, here he is with Studio Series 86 Optimus Prime, and in terms of display importance, here he is with minor Megatron. I know these guys are from different multi-packs, but I absolutely love how they look together, and in many ways I think not including them with each other was a missed opportunity. That being said, I should address the elephant in the room that this figure is not a singular release, this Orion Pax is from a multi-pack. For those curious what the figure he comes with looks like, it looks like this. It's Gladiator Megatron, and he's not nearly as nice looking as Minor Megatron. Now, it may seem weird to review a figure from a multi-pack without the other half of the multi-pack, but let's be honest, what is there to really say about this guy? He's just Minor Megatron, but with a significantly worse paint job. Even as someone who not only really likes the Siege Megatron mold, but thinks this is the best version of it, I don't really have anything good to say about the Gladiator Megatron version. Ever since getting Security Officer Orion Pax over the summer, these two have been the centerpiece of my legacy display, with Data Clerk Orion Pax and Gladiator Megatron simply being in storage. Data Clerk Orion Pax is pretty good, don't get me wrong, but these two, seeing them together in modern Chug just means so much more to me, and I will never get tired of seeing these two paired up. And sure, we can look back in hindsight and say Gladiator Megatron would have made more sense with Rat-Bat, or maybe even including an IDW Soundwave, or simply including the two Senators together in their own set, but what we got is what we got, and basically as a collector, it's your job to figure out how you want to display them, regardless of how they were packaged. Everything about this figure, from the paint color to the plastic use to the general sculpting, is absolutely phenomenal, but this is only half the experience, as most Transformers fans know. And since I have more than a minute to gush about this guy, we actually have time to do something I very rarely get to do on this channel, and that's talk about the alt mode. Despite being a remold of a figure with a completely different design, this vehicle mode is shockingly faithful. And in many ways, there's an argument to be made that it's even better than the Gamer Edition version due to one simple addition. The biggest complaint with the Studio Series Gamer Edition Optimus mold was that the back of it was completely exposed. This wasn't a huge deal for me as I display my figures in vehicle mode, and while it was a little annoying and unfortunate, this didn't really bother me. But this new version of Orion Pax actually features new feet that, when folded down, cover the fists and create a far more believable back. This is just such a nice, complete, and solid vehicle mode. The conversion is super fun, and on top of that, it still maintains a lot of the charm of the design, especially due to this really nice painted windshield and this really great conversion on the front panels. You have a couple slots on here that the gun can rest in, so you just take these two attachment points and just pop them in there, and it rests pretty accurately. It's not going to be moving around or falling off during play. You also have some 5mm ports on the side where you can plug in the arm cannons, and you have these exhaust pipes on the side, which again, just go a long way to elevating this beyond just your standard truck. There are a couple of gaps which, are a little annoying, but outside of that, this is just a super solid vehicle mode. It's wonderfully sculpted, and there's also a lot of really nice detail, especially on the tires. Overall, this is just a really great vehicle mode, and while it's nothing I plan to display the figure in as opposed to its robot mode because I simply like the way the robot mode looks way more, it's a really great compliment to the figure and makes it feel very complete as a Transformer. Now, just because I have nothing but good things to say about this toy doesn't mean that he's perfect. A few grievances many fans have noted are the large gaps in his thighs as well as his shoulders. Now, if you really don't like this, you can get gap fillers. However, it's ultimately not something that bothers me unless I'm directly looking at it. Also, I do worry about the longevity of the sliding mechanism on the back. It's a bit rough, it seems to be only really held in place by friction, and it feels like it might loosen over time. It is a bummer that these issues are here, but gaps and a few things that may wear down over time are honestly pretty light in terms of issues I have with recent Transformers. As many of you probably have gathered from my shorts, I've been very critical of Transformers Legacy, as I feel that the toy line never really lived up to the potential that it had as a series before it was succeeded by Age of the Primes. However, this figure represents Transformers Legacy at its absolute best, being a resourceful reuse of a pre-established mold in order to shine a light on a version of a character that hadn't gotten much attention or love recently. He represents the idea that just because something doesn't work right now doesn't mean it shouldn't be attempted again, as revised attempts can often lead to better results, something we've seen not only with the toy line, but its media such as comics, cartoons, and most recently movies with Transformers 1. So I very clearly love this toy. However, do I recommend that you go out and buy one for yourself? Well, unfortunately that's a bit more complicated, as this figure, while amazing, is part of a 2-pack, a $75 2-pack, and the figure he comes with isn't nearly as nice as this one. I love the idea of finally getting a figure of Megatron based on his time in the gladiatorial pits, but this figure doesn't do the design or the concept justice. The reason I always keep Security Officer Orion Pax posed with Minor Megatron instead of the figure he actually comes with is because this figure represents IDW Megatron far better. And if you really want this figure, the only way to get him is through a Comic-Con exclusive multi-pack that is still available on House Repulse, but even then, it's $75 US. That's more than a leader class figure. Hell, it's almost the price of a commander class figure, and while this figure is incredible, he's easily my favorite figure in Legacy, I can't say that he alone is worth $75, at least in good conscience. I'd say he'd be worth picking up on his own if the price was right, but honestly I don't even know what the price would be because I can't find a single listing for this figure on eBay, Mercari, or any of the sites I checked. There are, however, a ton of listings for Gladiator Megatron, which I think goes to show that this figure was the main reason people bought the multi-pack. These little issues are small blemishes on what I would otherwise consider to be a near-perfect figure. But despite all of that, he's still my favorite figure in the entire Transformers Legacy line. Hell, he may even be my favorite Transformer ever. And the reason why isn't because he's the best figure they've ever made. As much as I love him, he's far from that. But he is something else, and something that's more important. This is my Optimus. Chaos Theory Part 2 was the first piece of Transformers media I ever seriously consumed, and I absolutely loved it. Before this comic, Transformers was just big Hollywood blockbusters and a pretty silly 80s cartoon to me, but after reading this, it became so much more. Everything about this story, from the concepts to its politics to its just general pacing and action, completely changed the game for how I look at Transformers as a series and as a franchise. It was incredibly eye-opening, not only to what the Transformers franchise truly was, but the potential of what it could be. Watching the shift in comics from IDW to Skybound, to even the evolution of the movies from Rise of the Beast to the incredible Transformers 1. This series radically altered the trajectory of my own life, but in many ways I wouldn't be where I am today without it. So simply consuming the media to learning the ins and outs of online toy hunting, hell, even going to states I'd never been to just because they had a TFCon there. A shared love of Transformers is what got me connected with my current partner, and if we hadn't spent those countless nights just staying up late talking about these silly little robot toys, I don't know if our relationship would be in the great spot that it's in now. And if it wasn't for talking about Transformers, I probably wouldn't have found the success I found now on online video platforms. As crazy as it may sound, the domino effect of a lot of these good things happening to me happened because I became a fan of Transformers. And if it wasn't for the comic with this Optimus Prime design, that likely would not have happened, so I think it's fair for me to be a little lenient on some of his flaws. Objectively speaking, this figure is probably an 8 or 9 out of 10, but for me personally, he's an 11. And while there are bigger and better figures being released every day, I don't think any of them will ever mean as much to me as this one.